SimCity, SNES, 1991, developed by Intelligent Systems and based on the 1989 Maxis PC classic of the same name, spawner of a long-running franchise that was eventually drilled to the ground and eviscerated, or so I'm told. There's a bunch of them out there, some of which you could get off GOG.com right now for your PC, but we're looking at the SNES version of the original SimCity. I need something calm and soothing to oversee after that last brutal episode. May we never speak of it again. SimCity on SNES was in fact my first SimCity game that I've ever played. In fact, at the time, I didn't even know SimCity was a thing on the PCs until years later when SimCity 2000 was a thing. SimCity was also probably the fourth SNES game that I've ever played, after Super Mario World, Super Star Wars, and NHL 94. And then my older brother traded that and a couple other games for whatever version of Madden was out at the time. Bit of a raw deal, I think, but whatever. Decades later, I got my grubby mitts on SimCity. It sat on a shelf for a long time, and one day I just decided to pick it up, hop it onto the Super Nintendo, and played it for a bit. It was like taking a trip down memory lane and something. That's about the closest you're getting to nostalgic reminiscing or reflection or whatever today, so SimCity. For those who have never played a SimCity game, you're a newly minted bear and you're tasked with building a city. That's it. Sounds simple enough, but in addition to building the city, you're also maintaining the city, keeping everything in line, earning some money, keeping crime rates low, pollution low, be prepared for any disasters that may occur at any moment, or maybe not because you're usually the one triggering the disasters in the first place, since that's an option you could do that the game provides for you. SimCity offers a couple modes of play. There's a practice mode where you're given a small island and it's essentially a tutorial on how the game mechanics work. Though you're not all that overly tutorialized, most you're getting is a couple tips here and there, and that's about it really. For the purposes of having a picture on screen, we're using the practice playthrough just to give you a general idea of how things work. Doesn't show off everything. That's okay. Sometimes you don't need to show off everything, because you got to give somebody something to look forward to in case they decide to play this thing, and you probably should. Even though there's a whole bunch of SimCities out there that's more easily accessible and all that jazz. But anyways, there's a standard game, if you're done with practice, where you can name your city, pick a difficulty level, and also pick one of thousands of terrain to build your future metropolis upon. The game only has like 999 or whatever, but there's a code where you could sort of get another set of 999, so whatever. And finally, the game offers 6 scenarios for you to try and solve. Usually entailing, having to fix some problem that the city has within a certain time limit. And once you've solved those 6 scenarios, you get 2 more, and that's SimCity in a nutshell, pretty much. The thing that I admire about SimCity is its simplicity. Yes, there's lots of details you have to take into account when managing a city. Finances, citizen needs and happiness, that sort of thing. But it's never overly intimidating. I found this game really easy to get into, fiddle around with a couple of things, figure out how the controls work since every button on that SNES gamepad has some sort of function. The fact that it adopts a plain Jane 2D overhead grid-based view rather than try to do the whole 3D thing like later entries would employ adds to the game's simplistic and inviting gameplay. And before anyone asks, they did try to port SimCity 2000 onto the Super Nintendo years later. I haven't played it, but anyways. The overhead view I kind of prefer over what would come along later because you get to see everything that's on screen. No need to worry about what angle you're viewing the buildings from. It's all nice and clean looking and everything's right in front of you. For the most part, you still have to move the focus from one part of the map to the other because it's a very big map usually. But Otherwise, it's all nice and clean looking, very functional. If the idea of managing, building, and maintaining a city seems a bit daunting, you know what? Play around with Practice Map, and if you need a little guidance on how things work, and you'll get a couple more tips here and there than you would during a standard game. In either case, consult Dr. Wright, the in-game guide based on SimCity creator Will Wright, and he'll usually advise you on what's needed, if there's anything needed. He'll also pop up from time to time to advise you on things that may need your attention, or whenever you're given a new property to place on your real estate. And really from there, it's all in your hands. Create your city of dreams however you see fit. See it grow from a humble village to a thriving megalopolis, and once you're bored with all that, tear all that shit apart with all those disasters and the bulldozers and just watch it sort of blow up until you're eventually fired. Which is a thing that actually happens, but there you go. You learn something new every day. So as you're growing your city, you get little rewards like banks, zoos, casinos, and other such things, some of which, usually are conditional. Apparently the original computer versions didn't have these. That was a Nintendo edition, and that's nice that you're getting something for your efforts because your annual profits are slim pickings. That's probably my only real gripe with SimCity, or at least this version. You're almost always spending more than you're earning, and it's somewhat deflating. Even with a large city, your income's is slim pickings, and you're left with doing a lot of waiting as your constituents are demanding various things like a stadium or a zoo or whatever the case may be. You just don't have the funds to supply them with those things. That's the only real downside of things, but I'd imagine it's the same deal with the computer originals. Same deal with real life. In some ways, you're usually spending more than you're actually taking in, or maybe you need to better manage your finances, I guess. Although in this case, if you know how, you could probably cheat and get the money code some other way, but whatever. SimCity uses the stock SNES controller. I don't believe the mouse was a thing until Mario Paint came out a year or two later, so naturally navigating with the D-pad feels somewhat cumbersome, but it isn't too bad. I don't think. The cursor moves quickly enough, and every button on that controller, again, has some sort of function. A 3-year-old could figure out how to play this thing. Whether they'll stick with it or manage to get what makes SimCity tick is another story, but that's the general gist of it. Make it easy to learn, but difficult to master. The hallmark of any worthwhile craft, quite frankly. The graphics in SimCity are clean-looking, simplistic, yet still attentive to detail. Seeing your various zones develop from smaller houses and buildings to much larger infrastructures, the little dots on the road representing cars and traffic, the little Bowser thing rampaging through the city, essentially the SNES stand-in for the generic Zilla monster from the computer versions. The pop-ups with the little animated Dr. Wright character are somewhat amusing to look at as you're reading the status report. All the screens, graphs, and other bits and bobs are fairly easy to read and visualize. Visually the game looks fine, it's functional. On the sound front, it's a bit of a mixed bag, an acquired taste, if you will. Sound effects are so-so, the music is also so-so. A couple memorable jingles here and there, but even those are mostly okay at best. They fill the void in having background music during gameplay, but if you don't want background music, you could always turn it off. It's one of those cases where your mileage is going to vary one way or another. In my case, it's just like, it's okay, it's there. Barely notice it. So there's a whole bunch of SimCity games out there. There's a whole bunch of city sim games out there. In general, SimCity 2000, 3000, 4000, 5000, 6000, Cities XL, XXL, Cities DX Plus, Light Alpha, Turbo, Hyper Building, that sort of thing. They keep making these things, they keep adding more stuff, and I look at these games and they've certainly come a long way, I'll give them that much. And yet there's something about this first SimCity that appeals to me. Maybe it's the easy to get into aspect of it, maybe it's the fairly simplistic, lacking in excessive baggage that I find attractive about it, or maybe this is just a really fun game to play and that works best for me. Sometimes you don't need a whole lot of stuff to make a fun little city sim game, and that's what this SimCity game is. Certainly a good place to start before you jump farther on the whole city sim business thing, or maybe just to go back and see where it kinda sort of all began. It's a classic, still holds up today.